Everybody gets mad at their friends sometimes, right? However, because most of us are reasonable people, we work it out and soon enough things go back to normal. That wasn't the case for this teen who got so mad at his friends that it ended in him ending their lives. This is the case of Damon Kemp. Something important to understand about this story is that it isn't just the tale of a horrific crime, but a debate on whether this guy was trying to fool the justice system to get a lesser sentence. You'll get what I'm talking about soon, but first, let's just get into what happened. On December 7th, 2018, officers in Daytona Beach, Florida visited an apartment complex where they'd been called to investigate a burglary. There, they met Damon Kemp, who quietly and calmly made a shocking confession to the officers. "I killed my friend." They arrested Damon in connection with the burglary and then went to investigate the apartment that he'd been staying at. Inside, they discovered not one, but two bodies, Jordan Payton and Trey Ingram, who was the tenant of the apartment. Both boys were also just 19. It became clear straight away that something awful had happened here, and the police knew they already had a lot of questions that would be tricky to answer. There were bullet holes in the walls of Trey's apartment, and their bodies had been left there for at least 24 hours. All the while, Damon had still been staying there. Their first question was, why didn't anybody call the cops when they heard the shots fired? Well, the answer to that question was pretty simple. They were in a high crime area, and it wasn't unusual to hear gunshots. Still, if just one person had called, maybe paramedics could have saved Jordan and Trey in time. Next, they had to figure out why Damon would do something to two people he considered friends. It was actually way deeper than that, because Damon and Trey used to be roommates in the very same apartment where the crime took place. The two had known each other since high school and used to hang out all the time, playing basketball and going to parties. Trey was said to be super gifted, both academically and athletically, and everyone believed he had a really bright future ahead of him. What he was really known for was boxing. Trey was a really great boxer and planned to make a career out of it. Plans that were tragically cut short because of one night that went wrong. He and Damon even worked out at the same boxing gym together, and according to one of the trainers, there was zero signs of any hatred towards each other. The whole thing just seemed so confusing. Now, the police had a tough job of retracing the steps everyone took that night, which resulted in this seemingly spontaneous double homicide. They soon discovered that Damon had been living in the apartment until a couple of weeks prior to the murders when Trey kicked them out. Why? We don't know yet. That's just one of the pieces of info that the investigators are keeping close to their chests. They also learned that Damon had started acting strangely in the days leading up to the incident. Quincy Stith, Damon's latest roommate, gave Damon a ride to Trey's place that night and said he'd been acting pretty weird before that, describing him as paranoid and skittish. So looking at the evidence so far, it would seem that Damon was going through something psychologically on that terrible night. Well, that may not be the case. While behind bars, he agreed to give a phone interview in March 2019. In the interview, Damon claimed he has no mental health problems, and that on the night in question, he was just high. He admitted to smoking pot before heading over to Trey's place, but he believes it may have been laced with something else, which caused him to act erratically. Although this may have played a part in what happened, many are unconvinced by this story. For one, Damon was acting weird for days before this all went down, and he was still acting strangely after he was arrested. According to the officers who interviewed him, he was saying strange stuff for hours and being taken into custody when he had no way to access any more substances. There's also one key factor that plays into the theory that Damon may be mentally ill: the video that made him famous.
God! 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 God!
That video was taken during Damon's bond appeal, which unsurprisingly he was denied. No one knows why he was screaming, but that wasn't all he did during the hearing. Throughout, he could be seen making strange faces and like he was trying to hide from the judge. This video got a lot of mixed responses, to say the least. Damon's attorney, Patrick McCamey, was asked about the outburst and if Damon would be fit to stand trial in the coming months. At this point, it's too early to tell whether or not this particular defendant has issues of competency, issues of sanity. However, many people online believe that this was one crazy stunt so that when the time comes, Damon can plead insanity. Here are some of the comments of what people think of his outburst. Pathetic attempt at an insanity defense. He working hard for that insanity plea. This is nothing but an act this clown is putting on. A laughable attempt at playing crazy. And the Oscar goes to not you. And this wouldn't be the first time someone's tried something like this to get out of a life sentence. Dawson McGee was found guilty of killing his own mom in 2012, and he tried to get out of it by convincing the investigators that he was insane. What Dawson didn't realize was that when he was brought in for questioning, the cops put him in a room with a hidden camera. They managed to capture the moment he decided to put on his crazy act. This is why some cases take so much time to go to trial, including this one. Jordan and Trey died in 2018, and the case is still waiting to be solved. This is likely because, due to his behavior, Damon will have to undergo a lot of tests to see if he's even fit to stand trial. If he isn't, that could drag things out even longer. But as y'all are about to see, this isn't the first time someone has freaked out in court like this either. Most of the time when someone gets bad news in their trial, they at least try to stay dignified until they're out of the courtroom. But that isn't always the case. In 2014, Dylan Shoemaker was sentenced to life behind bars for the murder of his girlfriend's son, Austin, who wasn't even 2 yet. On the day of his sentencing, as soon as Dylan entered the courtroom, he turned on the waterworks and addressed his ex, Ashley, directly.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't.
Face the judge.
You really think I did that? I didn't mean to hurt him.
Now, despite how sorry he appeared, the judge wasn't convinced by Dylan's outburst, and for good reason. It turns out Dylan may not be as upset as he appears, as the judge revealed in a transcript of a phone call Dylan had with his mother.
I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me.
So you can kind of figure why people would be suspicious of Damon's behavior during his bail hearing. I mean, unless someone is truly sorry for what they've done, why wouldn't they try everything possible to stay out of prison? Although many alleged criminals make the mistakes of thinking ending up on a psych ward is better than prison. If someone is found to be too mentally ill to participate in their own trial, that is where they will be sent until they are deemed healthy enough to proceed. However, if it becomes clear that the culprit will never be well enough to go to trial, they can be found innocent by reason of insanity or diminished responsibility. This basically means the culprit's mental well-being prevents them from being able to tell right from wrong, so they can't fully defend their actions. If this is the case for Damon, he will be committed to a psychiatric hospital, which many people have claimed are worse than prison. In prison or jail, there you get a routine that is kind of similar to life on the outside. You get set meal times, exercise, socialize with other inmates, and some people even have jobs. However, in a hospital, you pretty much lose all your rights and can often serve longer sentences in there than you would in prison. One anonymous person who has been to prison and a psych ward had a number of reasons why they'd rather be in jail than the hospital. Forced medication in hospital is perhaps the worst experience I have ever had in my life. They force you to take strong antipsychotics that have a wide variety of potentially even life-threatening side effects that may permanently damage you. So, if Damon is pretending to be mentally ill, he may want to think twice about it. Either way, he is clearly someone that needs to go where he can't hurt other people. It's just so tragic that it was too late for Jordan and Trey. But that isn't the end of this story. There's a theory that Damon wasn't involved in the killings that night at all. Jordan's dad, George Gaines, told the press that he believes Damon was there when his son tragically died, but he doesn't believe he was the one that committed the double homicide. George claims more than 3 people were in the apartment on the night in question because of a conversation Jordan had on FaceTime in the hours before he passed. He also claimed that the police discovered more guns at the scene than they've mentioned, pointing the guilt away from Damon. However, the Daytona Police Department has responded to these claims, saying either they're false or they haven't found any evidence to support them during the investigation. But if that was true, it would turn everything upside down. So what now? Well, we'll just have to wait. The pandemic has also added complications with getting people to court, so who knows when we'll next hear from Damon. Hopefully, whatever happens, justice can be brought to Jordan and Trey, who deserved to be alive today. Now, we all have friends, and we love them, but would you trust them with your life? In this really insane case, a girl who thought she was just hanging out with her friends later found out they had something terrible planned out for her. This is the story of the 16-year-old boys who murdered their friend. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born in Pocatello, Idaho, in December 1989. She had 2 siblings, an older sister Christy and a younger brother Andrew. She and her siblings were raised by their grandparents for a while when they were younger, but eventually went to live with their mom and stepdad. Cassie was described as being artistic with a love for music. She was smart, kind, and very responsible. Everyone knew that they could count on Cassie to do the right thing. So when her aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, would go out of town, they would hire Cassie to house sit for them and watch over their pets, 2 dogs, and 3 cats. At the time that this story was taking place, Cassie was a junior at Pocatello High School, where she had met her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. After school on Friday, September 22nd, 2006, Cassie went to her aunt and uncle's house on Whispering Cliffs Drive in the northeast Bannock County, where she would house sit until Sunday. Since the house was in a pretty remote area, she asked her aunt and uncle if Matt could come and hang out with her in the evenings, and they agreed. Matt arrived at around 6 p.m. that evening, and the two decided to watch a movie called Kill Bill, Volume 2. What Cassie didn't know was that Matt had also invited his 2 friends, Tori Admick and Brian Draper, to hang out. They were both Matt and Cassie's classmates, and while Cassie considered them friends, they weren't really that close. So when the 2 boys arrived, Cassie was a bit upset since she had promised her aunt and uncle that she would only be having 1 friend over. But Matt assured her that it was okay since they were just going to hang out. Cassie gave the boys a tour of the house, and then they all went to the living room and continued with the movie. But just halfway through, Tori and Brian left, saying they wanted to watch a movie at the theater instead, and Cassie was left alone with Matt. A few minutes later, Cassie and Matt started hearing some weird sounds coming from the basement, and then the lights went out. They knew the power circuit was in the basement, but they were so freaked out that instead of going to check, they decided to just stay in the living room, hoping that the lights would come back on. And after a while they did, though that did not calm them down. They noticed that one of the family dogs kept staring down the basement stairs, barking and growling at something. This really spooked them out. When Matt saw how scared Cassie was, he decided to call his mom and ask if he could spend the night and keep Cassie company. But Matt's mom refused and instead offered for Cassie to come and stay over at their house. However, being the ever-responsible teen that she was, Cassie felt that it was her responsibility to stay. But that decision would later prove to be fatal. At around 10:30 p.m., Matt was picked up by his mom, leaving Cassie alone in the house. He never imagined that it would be the last time he saw Cassie alive. On September 24th, the Contreras came back from their trip, and what they found was truly horrifying. Frank and Allison's 13-year-old daughter was the first to enter the house, and as soon as she got to the living room, she started screaming. Blood was everywhere, on the carpet, the furniture, and the walls. Cassie's lifeless body was lying next to the couch in a pool of blood. Frank immediately called the police and Cassie's parents. Her mom and stepdad arrived as soon as they received the devastating news. Investigators quickly arrived and started processing the scene. They found no signs of forced entry suggesting that Cassie had let her killer into the house, meaning that she knew them. Apart from the living room, the rest of the house seemed intact. Nothing appeared to be missing, which ruled out burglary as a motive. The Contreras' dogs and cats were locked in a separate room, but were unharmed. The autopsy report showed the sheer brutality of the attack. She had been stabbed about 30 times in her chest, neck, back, and abdomen. The injuries had been caused by 2 knives, and 12 of the stab wounds were fatal. It appeared that she had been dead for 2 days, which means that she was murdered on Friday night. But who could do such a gruesome thing, and why? Investigators soon found out that Cassie's boyfriend Matt was the last person to see her alive. Given the gruesome way in which the murder happened, Matt seemed to be the only obvious suspect. But when he was brought in for questioning, investigators quickly ruled him out. Matt was very cooperative and told the cops everything that happened, including the weird noises and the lights going off, and how he had called his mother to ask if he could spend the night. He told how Tori and Brian had left earlier and how he had called Tori to let him know that he was leaving, but Tori was whispering and claimed to be in the movie theater. He went on to tell investigators how he had repeatedly called Cassie the following day, but she never answered. Investigators also found phone records that backed Matt's statement. The police then asked him about his friends, Tori and Brian. He said that he was better friends with Tori and that Cassie was also friends with them, but they weren't close. Both boys had been interested in Cassie in the past and had even flirted with her. Investigators then brought Tori and Brian in for questioning. and placed them in separate interrogation rooms. They both told detectives that when they left the Contreras' house, they went to watch a film, and later spent the night at Brian's place. But when the detectives asked them to describe the movie they had allegedly watched, neither of them was able to.
What's the whole premise or the plot of the movie? What's it all about?
Well, it was similar to white noise.
After several days of interrogation, Brian finally cracked. He told the investigators everything that happened, but placed the blame on Tori. According to Brian, he and Tori went to Cassie's that night, and when she was showing them the basement, Brian unlocked the door, which led to the backyard without Cassie's knowledge. So when they later pretended to leave, they actually went back to the car, put on some costumes which included dark clothes, gloves, and white masks, and then quietly entered the house from the basement. They started making loud noises and turned off the lights to lure Cassie and Matt to the basement, where they would scare them. But when they never came down, they turned the lights back on. Tori and Brian stayed in the basement for a while waiting for Matt to leave. They knew that his mother would pick him up at 10:30 p.m. and Cassie would be alone. When Matt finally left, they started messing around with the circuit breaker again, hoping that Cassie would come down. And when she didn't, Tori ran up the stairs and began stabbing her. Brian tried to downplay his role in the murder, even claiming that Tori had threatened him. But when Tori learned that Brian had talked and implicated him, he tried to defend himself by pointing the finger back at Brian, saying that it was all Brian's idea. He claimed that he thought they were just going to scare Cassie. He insisted that he believed they were just making a movie like the horror film Scream. He claimed that when they were in the basement, he was too scared to go upstairs. But when he eventually went up, he found Brian had already stabbed Cassie to death. While they both insisted the other did it, evidence revealed a very disturbing tale. Brian took investigators to a stash of evidence that they had buried in the Black Rock Canyon area. The evidence included white and red Halloween masks, a pair of gloves, and 4 different knives, one of which looked like a dagger, and another had a serrated blade. But the most damning of them all was a videotape with footage of the 2 killers planning to take Cassie's life. In the footage, investigators would learn that Brian and Tori considered themselves as budding filmmakers, mainly interested in making documentary-style films. They had a dark fascination with serial killers and were especially obsessed with the horror movie Scream. They went around recording themselves and sharing their dark thoughts on camera.
There should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but hell, you restrict somebody from it, they're gonna want it more.
They had even written what they called a death list, which contained names of some of their classmates and friends, including Cassie. In the video footage, Brian can be seen talking about Cassie being their first victim.
Our first victim is going to be Cassie's daughter. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get?
They had been following her around, sort of even stalking her, and recording it on camera. This footage was taken on the morning of the murder. How sick is that? Then get this, guys, they even recorded themselves after committing the heinous and gruesome act.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body.
Brian and Tori were tried separately for Cassie's murder. Brian's trial started on April 17, 2007, while Tori's began on May 31, 2007. Due to the horrific and gruesome nature of the crime, it was decided that they would be tried as adults. They were both found guilty of first-degree homicide and conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years to life for the conspiracy charge. And it did not end there. Both boys have appealed their conviction several times, hoping to get lesser sentences. Tori still continues to maintain that he's innocent, and his family has been firmly supporting him all the way. His mother, Shannon Admick, even wrote a book about her son and his experience as being tried as an adult despite being a juvenile at the time. Now guys, I get that no one wants to believe that their own son is a cold-blooded killer, but there's just too much evidence showing that Tori was guilty. Some of his classmates even came out to say how he would brag about committing the perfect crime. So while I feel bad for both Tori and Brian's families, I believe that the boys got what they deserved. The only victim here is Cassie. She thought that these people were her friends while they were plotting against her. She was a beautiful and kind person, and did not deserve any of this. I hope that her family will one day be able to get over their pain. May she rest in peace.
Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friends and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Are you telling me you killed somebody?
As much as I love the internet, I know it can be a dangerous place. Too often we see cases of kids getting hurt when they go to meet strangers online, and that was a problem before social media was even a thing. It seems like year after year we find ways to protect ourselves online, but internet creeps and find ways to work around them. Breck Bednar was barely a teenager when he was manipulated by an online criminal, and it cost him his life. This case became so famous that it's been adapted into a play and a drama-style documentary movie. Unfortunately, the reason it became so famous is because of how awful this whole case is. From the lack of action taken by the police, action that might have prevented Breck's death. Breck was born in 1999 to American parents Barry Bednar and Lauren Lefebvre. He was named after the town of Breckenridge in Colorado, where his parents met. After they got married, his parents moved to Surrey in the UK for Barry's job. He worked for an oil company and made good money, so the family got to enjoy a nice lifestyle. When Breck was just a toddler, his mom gave birth to triplets, 2 boys and a girl, who Breck totally adored, and they really looked up to him. Unfortunately, Barry and Lauren's marriage ended 6 years later, but they stayed on good terms, and Barry got to see the kids on a regular basis. Overall, everyone was happy and loved each other very much. Breck was known as a smart kid who liked fixing things. His mom said that instead of playing sports, he liked playing with Lego and toy soldiers with his friends. As he got older, Breck became interested in computers and built his own gaming PC, saving birthday and Christmas money to buy parts for it. Before long, Breck was invited to join an online gaming group with some of his IRL friends. Even though his computer was in his bedroom, he always had to have his bedroom door open so his parents could check on him. He and his friends liked to play games together, watch YouTube videos, and talk about music. It all seemed totally innocent, except for one thing: the person who ran the server they used to communicate. The server was run by an older teenager that none of the boys had met in person before. His name was Louis Daines. At just 17, Louis claimed to own a multi-million-dollar business as a computer engineer, and this took him all over the world. Since the boys had no reason not to believe him, they took Louis seriously and thought he was interesting, someone to look up to. But Breck's parents started getting suspicious when they noticed that Louis was clearly having an impact on Breck's life outside of gaming. Breck would say things like he didn't need to finish school because Louis would give him a Microsoft apprenticeship when he turned 16, and he should be allowed to game as much as he wanted because he didn't smoke or drink like a lot of kids his age. Now, it's important to remember that back in 2013, when all of this was happening, attitudes towards social media and online gaming were way different. There weren't really any laws protecting us from dangerous people online, and kids and adults alike were pretty naive when it came to this kind of stuff. I don't think my mom even had a Facebook in 2013, but now she spends more time on TikTok than I do. Lauren was totally at a loss of what to do. She didn't like Louis or the influence she was having on her son, and she was scared that he might have bad intentions. She talked to some of her friends and colleagues who pretty much told her to stop worrying, that Breck would grow out of online gaming and he'd get bored of Louis. In an interview, she said she couldn't help but feel like her concerns would have been taken more seriously if she was worried about one of her daughters. Because Breck was a boy, everyone seemed pretty sure he could handle himself, and it wasn't a big deal. As they grew more worried, Lauren and Barry tried everything to break Breck's fascination with Louis. They offered to take him to meet Louis, certain that Louis wouldn't show up, and that would make Breck realize he wasn't as impressive as he made himself out to be. However, Louis made the excuse that he couldn't just drop everything to meet up with Breck because of all the important work he had to do. They contacted non-emergency police to ask them to look into Louis and see if he had a background in hurting people. The call handler tried to brush off their concerns, saying they should just tell Breck to play on a different website or ask him to stop talking to Louis. They gave the handler Louis's full name and the country he said he was from, hoping that would be enough information for the police to do something, but this never happened. If the police had bothered to look into Louis's history, they'd see that he was someone with a dark past. His parents broke up when they were young, and his mom left the country, leaving him in the care of his grandparents, and for a short time in foster care. Since he turned 18, he was living alone in an apartment in Essex that his grandparents owned. He was unemployed and spent all day talking to younger boys online. There were even allegations made against him by a teenager back in 2011, but since he wasn't charged, he wasn't listed anywhere as being dangerous. When they heard nothing from the police, it was the last straw for Breck's parents, who decided to hold an intervention. They took away all of Breck's technology and had one of his friends from the group come over so they could talk about how suspicious they were of Lewis. But Lewis had plans of his own. When Breck told him that his parents were taking away his phone and computer, Lewis sent a new phone in the mail that Breck kept a secret from his parents and only used to talk to Lewis. It was during this time that he made a shocking confession to Breck. He was dying. Lewis told Breck that he had just weeks to live, and he wanted to give Breck his company to run himself after he passed away. All he had to do was travel to Lewis's apartment in Essex so he could show Breck how to run the business. On February 16, 2014, his mom's birthday, Breck was spending the weekend at his dad's house when he told him he was going to a friend's house, later texting him to ask if he could stay for a sleepover. Breck's dad was more than happy to let his son spend time with someone who wasn't Lewis, so he had no problem letting him stay overnight. Breck was actually in a cab paid for by Lewis on his way to Essex. No one knows what truly happened in that apartment, except Breck's final hours on Earth must have been painful and terrifying. Breck's friends were surprised to see that they had text messages from Lewis, who they'd all stopped talking to months ago when they figured out that Lewis was probably a liar and a creep. They were horrified when they opened the texts and saw that Lewis had sent them photos of a body tied up with duct tape and covered in blood. Straight away, they recognized the victim as Breck. The photos circulated through Breck's social circle quickly, and before long, they made it to his 3 younger siblings. Breck's family had no idea anything was wrong with him until the triplets started getting messages of their friends offering condolences and asking what the heck happened to their brother. As this was taking place, Lewis made a chilling phone call to 999.
And to the forensics team to my address, please.
What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
During the call, Lewis told the story of what happened to Breck, or his version of events anyways. He said that Breck was feeling extremely low and like he wanted to harm to himself. He claimed that Breck came to him because he was having issues at home and he didn't want to go back to his parents. Then Breck grabbed a penknife that belonged to Lewis and tried to stab him. In the struggle, Lewis got a hold of the knife and used it in self-defense against Breck and stabbed him in the neck. Despite his best efforts to stop the bleeding, it was too late for Breck. Except, of course, we know that isn't what really happened. Before he even called the police, Lewis sent out those photos to Breck's friends, and that doesn't sound like something an innocent man would do. When the police arrived at Lewis's apartment, they found Breck in the bedroom. His clothes were in garbage bags, and his hands and feet were tied with tape. How could he have attacked Lewis first if he was tied up? They also discovered all of Lewis's electronics in the bathroom sink covered in water. Clearly an attempt by Lewis to erase anything on those devices that could incriminate him. Lewis pled guilty to murdering Breck and was given a life sentence. He will be in prison for a minimum of 25 years. That hasn't stopped him from tormenting Breck's family. In January 2016, it was reported that Lewis had started a blog from prison, and he posted an open letter, pretty much blaming Breck's parents for allowing him to get close to their son. He claimed that when the family told countless lies to the media, including that his apartment was a dump, when according to Lewis, the police saw that it was very clean, tidy, and on a nice street. He has also allegedly been contacting Breck's siblings through Snapchat, sending them horrible messages saying that he's going to dig up Breck's grave and destroy his headstone. He's also sent messages with details about the case only Lewis and the police know, which has convinced Breck's family that it must be him. There hasn't been an update on these incidents since 2019, so hopefully they've stopped and Breck's family can go on with their lives in peace. After the police did nothing to help Lauren and Barry, they filed a lawsuit against Essex and Surrey police for failing to do anything to stop Lewis. An investigation was done into how Breck's case was handled, and in short, the authorities totally failed him. When Lauren called the police, they were meant to tell her about the CEOPC, an organization dedicated to keeping kids safe online by offering support and advice to parents. There also should have been a check performed on Lewis's background and his computer, but this was never carried out. To stop this from happening in the future, call handlers for emergency services businesses are now given full training so they can deal with issues like these. Lauren also started an organization of her own, the Breck Foundation. Lauren gives talks and seminars in schools in hopes to educate kids and parents about the dangers of talking to strangers online. Their motto is, play virtual, live real. This was a really important story to cover. I know some of you guys watching are probably close to Breck's age, and I bet you've been told by your parents more than once, don't talk to people you don't know on the internet. It's important to remember that when your friends and family say this stuff, they're just trying to keep you safe. Always question your online friends, no matter how well you think you know them. That brings us to the end of today's video. What do you think of this case? I'll be looking forward to seeing what you guys think down in the comments below.